All right. It's the moment we've all been waiting for. Forget everything you know about fuel injection systems.
Done.
I know. That didn't take long.
Yeah.
It's time to talk about the Continental TCM fuel injection system. I never knew anything. A system unlike any other system out there. Completely and totally different. Whoosh. I like it. I think it's really cool. The Continental fuel injection system, unlike the other systems, all the other systems measured some air and then added fuel based upon how much air was coming in. The Continental system says we don't care about air. We're going to strictly go off RPM because the faster the engine goes, the more fuel you need. So why put in this extra step of measuring the air and then adding fuel? Let's just measure RPM, set it up so that it works with RPM, and off we go. So completely and totally different.
Make sure you clean the filters.
Yes, make sure you clean the filters. Okay. It requires a very special fuel pump. It is a rotary vane fuel pump, but you just can't bolt on a rotary vane fuel pump. The fuel pump is part of the system. So it's special to this. It is going to use a throttle body which contains the throttle. Flow divider, which they're going to call something else, fuel nozzles. The one tricky thing that we're going to have to deal with here a little bit is Continental configures them differently. So what we're looking at here is a configuration that would be similar to what came off the Skymasters. This would not match the system that we have on our bench. Although the operating principle is exactly the same, they just move components around, but they do the same thing. So once you understand the basic concept, you can actually take apart these pumps and go, if you think about it, and go, oh, I can see exactly what they're doing. It's just the same thing. So, all right, so major components right there. Special fuel pump, throttle body, flow divider, nozzles. So the way it works is this drawing really works super well for us. It's very simple and it has everything on it. Right there, to the fuel control unit, which is to engine. Well, it's to the fuel control unit, then to the engine, engine. The fuel control unit's going to do some final metering. All right, but this is what the pump looks like. So in the middle, we've got a rotary vane pump, which we're all familiar with now, right? All right, so let's find our fuel inlet. Here we go. Fuel inlet from the boost pump goes into a squirrel chamber where it goes round and round and round, and that causes any bubbles to go to the top. The bubbles then are subjected to an ejector pump, which is nothing more than a little venturi, and a venturi makes suction. That suction pulls the bubbles and sends it off to. So you've always got a return line going to the tank with some bubbles in it. So when you look at our we have a mock-up in class and when we run it, you're going to see a clear line which may have some bubbles in it. Well, that's what it's supposed to do, coming right out of the pump. All right, so it squirrels here, goes into the pump. It's going to come right here, and it really has two ways to go. 1, 2. We could back up and talk about this briefly, which is nothing more than a bypass valve, because when the boost pump is on, fuel has to go somehow to the engine, and then the way it's going to go is this way through the bypass and off to the engine. That's the boost pump. All right. What closes this check valve? Anytime you have a little check valve like that, what closes it? The spring is extremely weak, and it will keep it. So if pressure is greater on A side than it is on B side, if A is greater, it's always going to be open. But the minute B is more than A, boom, it's closed. All right. So that's only there, the bypass, so that we can get some fuel from the boost pump in the event that the pump quits and for starting. It's really the only time we want to use that boost pump. Because with this particular system, if the boost pump is more than the engine-driven pump, it's going to screw everything up because the speed of this pump is part of the whole system, right? So the faster the engine goes, the faster the pump goes. Faster the pump goes, the more fuel is going to go to the engine. It's the way it's supposed to work. But if you turn on an electric boost pump, and by the way, these have a high and a low setting on them, and you turn it on high while it's idling, all the fuel is just going to come through here, come around here, bypass everything, go flood the engine out. It'll die. So electric boost pumps don't work well with this system. Okay, back to the operation, which is so simple. Fuel is then drawn in through here. So we got it running now. We'll turn off the boost pump. This pump sucks fuel up from the fuel tank. Fuel comes in through here, goes around through, gets to this point right here, and has two ways to go. Way number one is to the fuel control unit. Way number two is back to the inlet side of the pump. We have an orifice here. You could call it a main metering orifice if you like. It's not, but for right now we could say it. Huh?
How, when the fuel is coming from the boost pump
Mhm.
into that first inlet, how is it, what's making it spin like that to bring out the
Oh, okay. I don't know. No, I'm just kidding. It's unknowable.
Just does.
If we look at the top going down, I don't know if I could draw it. It's a round chamber, and the inlet's like right here. So when it comes in and swirls like that.
Gotcha.
So it's just offset,
Okay,
so it
so,
forces
alright.
it to go around.
Fair enough. I was just curious how that
Yeah.
works.
Well, that's a beautiful drawing right there. You look at that. Oh, God drew a squirrel
I know.
chamber. Okay.
Look at that science.
So back to here. We've got two ways to go back to. Two ways. One's going to go to the fuel control unit. The other way goes back around through this bypass valve right here. A little bit's always going to go back to the fuel tank, so we've already talked about that. Now we can forget about it. So this is under low speed. Let me just make sure what's my next drawing. I should have started with this drawing. There we are in bypass. Goes around through the bypass, start the engine up. Now I'll go backwards one. All right, so we have two ways to go. Fuel control unit or back around. The size of this orifice determines how much fuel goes to the engine. So it's completely backwards in everything else. The bigger this orifice, the less fuel goes to the engine. The smaller the orifice, the more fuel goes to the engine because it's hard to get back around this way. Now there's two items here. One, you have a spring-loaded pressure relief and an orifice. So hopefully I've conveyed to you that orifices don't necessarily work well. Or you can't take an orifice and say, well, this orifice is going to meter fuel at idle and at full RPM. It doesn't work that way, right? Because orifices kind of tend to work. You either set it up for idle or you set it up for full RPM. Well, this particular one, we'd call that the high-end metering orifice. That's the high end. High end. And that's the name, is going to be used for higher RPM. This right here is the low RPM pressure relief. So at low RPM, we're going to use this pressure relief valve because we can set it for specific low end pressure, 5, 7, 10 psi. And so that's going to keep this at low idle or low end speeds to about 10 psi. It's a lot less than that. It's more like 5 to 7, which will then send a certain amount of fuel off to the fuel control unit. So as we open up the throttle and the pump starts turning faster and faster, well, this right here just isn't going to be able to deal with that. It's just going to, it's a weak spring. It's going to push it out of the way. You just get out of the way there. And then we're going to go on the high end. So we're going to have two adjustments on the pump. Got it?
Yes.
Okay. So the special pump, the more that you have recirculating, the less you have going to the engine. It's just that simple. So when you look at it, you're going to look for the recirculating. Recirculating means not going to the engine. Oh, I should have said discard. There we go. This should go here. There we go, bypass. All right. Here's our pump, what it looks like. Again, this is the pump off of the Skymaster's type. The major difference is this one has a mixture control built into it. The ones for the bigger bores don't. The mixture control is up on the fuel control unit. Does the same thing. All right, so let me see. We've got fuel pump outlet, which is going to go to fuel control unit. Vapor return, which goes back to fuel pump inlet that comes from the tank. Okay. I think we're missing one thing. Yeah, the other side. All right. Adjustable orifice. That is the high end, and low pressure relief back here is for low, just like it says. Okay, it's got a drain on it, and that drain goes to overboard, and it tells you when you have a leak that you don't want. This is the throttle body. This throttle body actually matches the pump that I just showed you. All right, this is the other fuel control unit. So some of you, when you're doing your orals, you're going to get the first system we just looked at. Some of you are going to get this one. The pump works the same. It's the same diagram. The only difference is, like I said, the Skymaster versions will have the mixture control here and idle metering jets on this side. There's metering jets, not idle, metering jets. Okay. But for the rest of you, you get the big bore. This is what this looks like. It's a little complicated, and I don't even know if I'm going to get into all the nuances here, even in lecture. It's something that it's best when you have it in your hand and a book next to you, and you go, that goes there and that goes there. And I've got a really good book that somebody did. I made copies for you for the small nuances on it. But otherwise, I'll explain it here. I'm like, I don't know what you're talking about. Okay, fuel inlet. You can always identify the fuel inlet because this cap right here covers a screen, which should be checked and cleaned 100 hours. So some of you might have noticed that I was messing with that little mock-up because it no longer works. And so I cleaned the main screen, and I thought, well, I don't remember anybody ever checking this screen. We pulled it out. It was just plugged, and nothing worked. And it had 50 some PSI on the system, and it was not. So I thought, well, it was a last-ditch effort. Why don't I try cleaning the screen? And it was bad. And now this thing works better than I've ever seen it work because nobody ever did it. So, okay, fuel is going to come in. And it is going to go through, I have to do this by memory, the mixture control sleeve first. So we got a mixture control. And then it has a couple of orifices. This is the hard part. Has a couple of orifices. So you can see that because it is a constant displacement pump, it has to put out X number of pounds per hour of fuel. It's leaving the pump. You've got a fixed orifice in there when you're running it, and only so much is going to get through that fixed orifice. The rest of it has to go somewhere, and we're going to send it up here. Now, if the pilot says, well, I want it a little bit leaner, we're going to have a little too much fuel coming this way. So there's going to be a secondary orifice that's going to open up. So if a primary is going to come through this way and send over to the throttle, and we're going to have another little bit over here that's allowed to go back to the pump, a return line. Yeah. Now, on the other pumps, you're not going to see that return line because the mixture is built into it, so the recirculating already happens inside of it. All right, then it's going to come over here to the throttle. And the throttle, depending on how much you've opened that, is another orifice. By the way, in between them, this, like right there where I'm pointing, the main metering orifice is right in that little tube. It's tiny. It's surprisingly tiny for big engines. All right, so that comes through. You got another metering orifice that's going to be for your throttle. Oh, it even says that. Fuel metering plug. Throttle metering shaft. I got it right. I didn't even look over there. All right, so they have these shafts that go through there. I will tell you that there is another orifice not depicted on here that is a return going back the other way with a little tiny check valve. It's a very itty bitty tiny check valve. And the whole idea is that when you go to idle, and only at idle, where the idle level is all the way back, and you pull the mixture all the way back, only at that point, there's some orifices that line up with a check valve that's going to go backwards. So for you, backwards would be that way. So it bleeds off fuel from the fuel manifold to go back through the throttle, through the plug, and back and out. So it bleeds off and lets the pop it shut down. Follow? Okay. But you can get to that.
Is that, do I think of that as like pressure being pushed back or settling the fuel, or
Just
is that
settling. Yeah, push back.
Okay.
Yeah. So just a non-colored version of this. Let me see. I don't think it really shows anything we didn't already talk about.
Does each end of that operate
Independently.
independently?
Yes. Except, and I was hoping to get a picture of this. Let me see. Oh, that was the picture I wanted. All right. Right here, that's the throttle lever that we looked at on the fuel control unit. It is connected with a rod that goes to a second lever, which is in fact the actual throttle lever. So this one right here, hopefully you can see that. Go laser horn. This lever right here actually controls the butterfly valve. Okay? This right here actually controls the throttle lever inside of the fuel control unit. Located there on that lever is a screw. If you can read that, it says idle mixture adjustment screw. So what you're doing is at idle, you'll pull it all the way back to idle, so now this butterfly is closed inside this throttle body, letting just a little bit of air squeak by. And of course, at the same time, this throttle lever over here on the fuel control unit set to a certain point with a certain size orifice. Well, maybe that orifice is a little too open a little bit too much, or maybe it's closed a little bit too much at that exact position. So that little screw will allow you to adjust the relationship between the two. So that will give you your idle mixture. How do you know when the idle mixture is correct?
You see a slight rise in RPM.
When? You can't just say a slight rise in RPM, and I'll tell you why. Because I've had so many classes where they literally say that. Well, you'd have a slight rise in RPM. And they literally believe that you just kind of look at it and it goes up. Or you pull the mixture all the way out and the RPM goes up 50 and it just runs at 50 for a while. Ever.
So be specific when you say you see a slight rise
Go
in
to idle,
RPM.
cut off.
And
Right.
then it dies. In idle cutoff position, you see a slight rise of 25 to 50 RPM, and then the engine dies. All right.
Be specific.
So, yes. So, if you did not get your idle rise, then you would tighten that.
Tighten it.
Yeah. Or just look at it, whichever way is going towards more open throttle. That's how you look at it. Okay. On the other style, it's a little screw right here. It's a hidden screw. Oops. That is so not what I wanted to do. Back on this one, idle mixture is right there. Because inside there, there's a disc, a rotating disc that opens up the little orifice that allows the fuel to go through to, it's bolted on here, but it doesn't spray it in here. It just, hoses come up through here, go through here, and then go off to the flow divider. So, but that little screw in there adjusts where the disc is in relationship to the throttle right here. And of course, throttle idle speed is always set by just a set screw on the throttle. So look for that. Okay. Again, quick overview here. Unlike the Bendix system, the Continental system, as I mentioned the other day, does not meter any fuel ever. Yeah, and they call it the fuel manifold body. So I will continue to call it probably by the wrong name, sorry. So the way this works is fuel comes in and it presses up on this diaphragm. This is my best drawing. Ugh. Fuel inlet comes in here, presses up on the diaphragm and lifts this body right here, if you can make that out with a little cross hatching, lifts that up. That, if you want to think about it, cocks it like a gun. It hasn't gone off yet. It's going to lift it up. But fuel has to go through here and down. So it's going to, according to this drawing, through here and then down here and into here. So it's going to pick it up so that this little part comes up here. We'll say it's got to go through that little hole, down this poppet valve and out. This poppet valve is very tiny and it's spring loaded. And so fuel pressure starts to build, lifts the main poppet valve up to where it's now, holes are lined up. Then the fuel is going to go through and it has to build up to enough pressure to push down on this poppet to open it up. There's really not much surface area on that, so it's all about spring pressure on that one. So boom, it pushes it down. Now fuel starts to flow. If fuel goes below the minimum fuel setting, that poppet pops right back up and just kills the fuel. So that we get a quick and sudden cutoff and a quick and sudden go. It's none of this dribbling, a little V-slot or anything like that. It's like all on, all off. Well, that's a porta test. The reason why I have that on there because I'll talk about a porta test. The main problem with the Continental fuel injection system is that it's a little temperamental and it's supposed to be set up, according to Continental, at each, what's the word, environmental change, which to me says summer, winter. So twice a year you're supposed to set this up if you follow that. It doesn't say twice a year, it just says environmental change. So take that what you want to be. Maybe you think it's global warming by a certain number of degrees or something. And I don't know anybody with this system who ever comes in for a routine setup. They just don't. It's expensive and very time consuming and quite honestly a little hard on the engine. And you need specialized equipment. You don't necessarily need a porta test. I tried to find one at any cost and could not find one to buy from here. But Continental does allow you to just use some calibrated gauges. But the nice thing about this is it actually has flow gauges. So you have pressure and flow. What we're looking at, I'll tell you the problem with that is it's very, very difficult to hit the numbers when you have 4 gauges to deal with. If you only have 2, it's much easier. But anyway, so twice a year you got to plug this whole thing in. And nobody does it. And set up your low end and high end. And it's, I had a video, but I couldn't stand watching it. For every few minutes, they would stop and go through about a 1 minute disclaimer. And then they do like 2 minutes and do 1 minute. It was the same disclaimer over and over. I'm like, oh my gosh, stop it. But anyway, you plumb in this porta test or your pressure gauges as they've shown right here. And you set up your, idle the engine, you set up your low end pressure. And then you run up high, and then you set another pressure, and then you run it back to low and set the other. By then the low pressure's off because you adjusted that. So you just keep going back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, until you finally get what you want. Anyway, we'll get in more into that. So I think that's all the pictures I have. Right there is the high end. Thing on the back, low end. High end is an orifice. Low end is a pressure relief valve. I think that was last side. Got it?
All right.
All right. That was fun. Vent cap. Vent never faces into the wind. Oh, there we go. I guess that does show it. So low pressure goes in here, lifts it up. And then when it's appropriate, it pushes down and fuel starts to flow. This is just showing it flowing more. As the pressure increases, that just goes down, but doesn't really change much.
On low pressure, where is it escaping from?
It's coming down. Same thing. This valve is open on both of them.
Just like a little hole.
It just happened to push down further as pressure increased, but it was already open.
Is it, I know, but is it going around the spring or is
Yes.
it going
Yep.
through?
Yes.
Yeah, both. Once it makes it past here, it's going to surround the spring.
Okay,
But it's got to go around that little hat, and then it fill all that up.
gotcha.
All right. Now I get to write a bunch of stuff. What do we got? Continental fuel injection, which I will say TCM, which really isn't proper anymore because they're not really owned by Teledyne Continental Motors. They're owned by same people that own Beechcraft, Textron. Yeah. Thank you for that. So Continental.
Did you know that, Tyler?
What kind of engine does the Continental fuel injection go on? Continental. You will never find one on a Lycoming. They're colored golds. Therefore, they go on Continentals. So unlike all other fuel control units, all other fuel control units, the TCM system does not measure air. But uses a unique fuel pump to deliver the proper amount of fuel based on engine RPM. Unique fuel pump to deliver the proper amount of fuel based on engine RPM. There's a joke in there somewhere. I don't remember all of it. How do you catch a unique rabbit? Unique up on it.
Wait, what?
Unique up on it.
Oh,
But there's another part of that. I forget what it is.
very slowly.
Why is it that only TCM can go on Continental?
Well, it's like putting a Ford carburetor on a Chevy engine. It's not allowed to do it.
I mean,
Can't wear Nike and Adidas.
That's right. Yeah, you can't wear Nike shoes and Adidas pants, can you?
I bet you can.
Is anybody in here doing that right now? Didn't think so. Why don't they? You could. It's just a recip engine's a recip engine. But they don't. It's just two different ways of doing something. If you could spin the pump on a Lycoming at the proper RPM, which means you'd have to have the gear ratio come out correctly for the pump, then you could bolt one on. But I don't think it does. Based on engine RPM. All right, 4 basic units. Four basic units. They are the unique fuel pump, which we'll just call the fuel pump. Fuel injection pump. Fuel injection pump, the fuel air control unit. The manifold valve, I don't even use these terms. Manifold valve. And the fuel discharge nozzles. Manifold valve, which is what I call the distributor valve, sorry. The fuel air control unit, remember that can be split up. You can have a unit by itself, or they can split it up, put part of it on the pump, part of it on the throttle body. That should be another part. Fuel injection pump, air control unit, manifold valve. Should be 5 basic units. We should have the throttle body on there. I'm going to add it. Because I can. Because that's a very important thing. All right, talk about the fuel injection pump. Fuel injection pump. What kind of pump is it? Positive displacement. Rotary vane pump. What drives it? Engine driven. The operation. Let me see. Fuel enters the squirrel chamber. Fuel enters at swirl, or they call it swirl well, a vapor separator. The swirling of fuel. Nobody asked me if I was saying squirrel.
Oh,
I
assumed
like
you were
it.
the whole time. It's like, I keep hearing squirrels. So I heard squirrels there. I was like, I'm not going
Is he
there.
playing a joke on us? Or?
So one time I did it for a long time, and finally somebody raised their hand and go, "I'm sorry, I have to ask. Are you saying squirrel?" I'm like, "I really was." Said like 8 times. Somebody asked. And so I had a girl in my class. She's an incredible artist, and she you'll see it when you do the oral. She drew a little picture of a squirrel, and she stuck it in there, and she reassembled the whole pump. So when I took it apart for the oral, and I was like, a little squirrel in the chamber. So it made me laugh. The swirling of fuel allows what? Vapors. Vapors to separate. And float, if you like. Float to top of chamber. Okay. I guess I come back around to it. We'll just go with it. 3, fuel enters the pump. Fuel enters the pump. Number 4. Fuel is then either sent to the FCU, yeah, back around, so that would be through relief valve. Or really there's 3 paths. One is FCU, the other goes this way, and then that splits in 2. So through the relief valve or vapor ejector.
Do you combine sent and to into one word?
What?
Number 4?
Sent to, yeah.
Sea World.
But you knew it.
Same time.
I mean, you read it correctly.
Yeah, I know. Why you got to interrupt me for? You knew what it was.
It's only weird if it doesn't work.
So one time a student was making sound of fun, and it was all in good spirits like him. I'm like, well, do you think you can do better? Come on up. And so the student's like, yeah. And so he came up and got right to here. You ever stood up here and looked at everybody? Turned white and like sat down. I'm like, it's not so bad. I mean, yeah, they bite, but. All right, the vapor ejector. So the vapor ejector is a small pressure jet of fuel. Is a small pressure jet of fuel which feeds into return line and carried back to the tank. It's a small pressure jet of fuel which feeds, I don't like this sentence, which feeds into return line and carried back to tank.
That was the Venturi shaped.
Yeah. I think it would have been better to put something about being a Venturi. I'll write Venturi. While you're writing that. When I was in the Navy, we had vapor ejectors. They weren't vapor, but we'd use them for flooding, evacuating a flood. They were huge. I mean, they were like that tall, about that big around. You hook giant fire hoses up to it, and you just run the fire hose, and it would do the same thing. It would shoot it back out, take another pipe, run it out, and it would suck everything up and shoot it out. So as long as it worked, it would shoot the fire water in and out and carry other stuff with it. But if you got a plug up there, then you just flooded everything back again.
Oh, so there's inlet, outlet, and then the hose
Yeah.
inlet.
Yeah, so it was just looked just like that. But instead of being that big, it was that tall. So if there was a blockage right there, then the fuel would just come this way and come back into here, and then the vapors wouldn't go anywhere. So don't cap that.
Whatever you do.
Yeah. No, but it's just a little Venturi. But you got to have pressure going through it, so the pressure from the fuel goes back, and then it goes. It does not go back to the inlet side of the tank because we got to get rid of these bubbles. So they got to go all the way back to the tank. And that can cause some problems with fuel management because it doesn't switch tanks. If it's going to the left tank, it goes to the left tank. If it goes to the right tank, it goes to the right tank. So if you fill both tanks up to the brim, and let's say it's going off to that tank, because right and left is backwards for you, so we're flying. And the ejector pump, we had a single engine that's going back to that tank, and we got all of our tanks filled up, and we decide we're going to run the engine off the left tank. So we're going to suck some engine fuel from the left tank, run it to the pump. Pump's going to take some and send it back to the right tank, which is already full. So it's going to shoot it out the vent.
You can't switch that.
Uh-uh.
You can't put a.
Nope. Nope. So our 310 has, well, it's got more problems now because I caught it on fire. But before I caught it on fire, it only had one working boost pump. I'll say it was on the right side. I think it was right. Right wing boost pump worked, and you have to have a boost pump to start these, because otherwise, how do you get fuel to the fuel injection to prime it? So you'd start the left engine off the right boost pump. So you turn on the boost pump, run it through the right mix forward, left throttle forward, prime the left engine, start the left engine. Now it's running on its own Continental system pump. And so then you'd have to switch all of the fuel so that that engine is sucking off the left side. Otherwise, when you try to start the right and hit the boost pump feeds both of them. So that side starts running all stupid and you don't get enough pressure for this one. So now you got to reconfigure that over to here. And then you got the right boost pump, go to the right engine, start the, align the right engine to the right tanks because you have cross feeds and all that. So anyway, yeah. One day, I'll tell you that because we used to let students, I'd let taxi all around and stuff, and I came out and they come taxiing up in the 310 and spraying fuel out. Hey, you got to realign something over here. All right.
That's how it caught fire.
No, it caught fire. I don't know how exactly it caught fire. I was starting it, and oh man, that engine does not start. Those engines just do not want to start at all. You would just prime the living daylights out of them, and they wouldn't get anything. And I prime and I finally got it to start, and it was running. And I think one of the hoses had a hole in it right above the exhaust, and started spraying on the exhaust. And so the students were like, there's a fire. And I'm like, well, I weren't specific, and I was trying to start it. So I thought, well, maybe it's, you know, it just started to catch. And I thought, yeah, maybe it was an induction fire. And it wasn't, but it shut down on its own. And all right, fuel inject positive, or was I somewhere around here? Fuel inject positive.
Students being so dramatic.
Vapor ejector. Oh, go way down there. Yeah. Just keep going. 4. So I'm on point number 5. 5. The amount of fuel. The amount of fuel going to the FCU. Going to the fuel control unit is dependent on the size of the return path, is dependent on the size of the return path to the inlet side of the pump, to the inlet side of the pump.
High-end workers?
Both high and low.
High and low.
Mhm.
Okay.
I wrote this, but it's not entirely true. It's the fuel will take the path of least resistance. That's not true, because I'm not going to write it. It has to go through all the paths. So you can't say it takes the path of least resistance, because if one of them was less resistant than the other, that would imply that it all goes that way. It doesn't do that, so I won't write that. So I will put the smaller the return, which would be a small return orifice, or higher pressure on the low end side. The smaller the return, the more fuel will go to the FCU. All right, we have a problem, which we talked about. At idle, what's wrong with my metering orifice there? It's not the metering orifice, it's the return orifice.
It doesn't matter. 'Cause
Doesn't meter. So at idle, I wrote the main metering jet. It's not the main metering jet. It's the high end. At idle, the high end metering orifice. Not office, orifice. The high end metering orifice is too big or small? It's too big to be effective. Too big to meter fuel. So the relief valve, I'll put the low end relief valve, determines the amount of fuel that goes to the FCU. Right, so at idle, it's that low end relief valve, does all the work. Then as we increase the throttle, it's opened up all the way. It's no longer doing any of the metering. So we have a little high end metering orifice that we can adjust, that the smaller we make it, the more fuel goes to the engine. The bigger we make it, the more returns and recirculates.
And the opening and closing of that orifice, is that the fuel mixture?
Nope.
Okay.
Right there.
Just put the-
Little tiny screw in there. So you take a straight blade, little tiny straight blade, and you put it in there and you turn it. If I turn it in, it screws it in, makes that orifice smaller. So if it's smaller, more fuel goes to the fuel control unit. If I open it up, pressures drop, more recirculates in the pump. I would say never, never, ever touch these two things unless you have fully instrumented and you have the gauges out, plumbed in, as per the service bulletin, or in Continental, they got rid of service bulletins, so to speak, and they call it the M0 manual, which just incorporates all this stuff. So unless you have the maintenance manual out and you have the gauges, properly teed in. Otherwise, don't touch those pump screws. What can you adjust? Idle mixture, idle speed. Where's the idle mixture? Idle mixture is either going to be the screw. It's either on the throttle body.
Or the rotating disc?
Or it's the one that's.
It's either this right here. That's not on the pump, is it?
No.
It is not on the pump. It's nowhere near the pump. It's next to the throttle body. So it's a long way from the pump. That screw or that hidden screw right there, which is not on the pump, it's on the throttle body. So all of the things that you can touch are on the throttle body. Everybody knows what the throttle body is? Can we touch the stuff on the pump? Not unless you put on all the proper gauges. Some people try and do it with the flow gauge in the aircraft. That is not appropriate. What happens if you screw up and get it a little bit too lean? Now, I have somebody, well, what would be the outcome if you're like, I know what I'm doing. I'll just kind of make it a little bit, just lean it out a little bit. What is the risk of going too lean?
Detonation.
Detonation. How much is a new Continental engine?
A couple $100,000.
A couple $100,000. You can buy a whole plane for that, but up to 100,000 I've seen. So unless you want to buy a new engine, I would suggest you don't touch those things.
Stick to the throttle body.
Don't touch them. What can you touch?
Speed and mixture.
And they're located on the
Throttle body.
throttle body. All right. I heard a very nasty story yesterday about somebody who lost their job recently. They were supposed to be doing something to an airplane and accidentally took off the wrong control cables, but put them back on and didn't tell anybody what they had done and had them crossed. And I don't know who caught it, but the quality control guy missed it, which it's like, well, why would you check that if it wasn't part of the job? So I don't blame him, but somebody caught it before the pilot killed himself.
Was that the one over here in Mayfair?
Yeah.
The one that Heath was talking about?
Is that who was talking about it?
Heath on the other side?
Heath, yeah.
Yeah.
I didn't know who. I heard it from Kelly.
Yeah, Heath was the one that watched that dude almost die.
So what happened?
They took off.
We took off?
Yeah, he was about to, yeah.
About to.
Yeah, and he noticed that, I think he said it was an elevator.
Yeah.
Cables were switched.
Trim. I think it was trim or
Or
elevator.
trim cables. that's
Okay,
what it
trim.
was. Trim cables were switched around. And so,
Yeah. I almost killed somebody with trim
there
cables.
was a pilot in